YouTube kanalından yayınlanan Digital Minds programına hoş geldiniz. Digital Minds'da SabancıDx'in de geliştirdiği veri, analitik ve yapay zeka temelli çözümleri ele alıyoruz. Bu bölümdeki konuğumuz Fortinet Güvenlik Öngörüleri ve Küresel Tehdit İşbirlikleri Başkanı Manky. Manky bize bu bölümde pandemi sonrasında evde çalışanların sayısının artması ve akıllı cihazların daha çok kullanılması nedeniyle oluşan güvenlik açıkları ve yapay zekanın siber güvenlikte neden daha çok yer aldığını anlattı. Manky, welcome to the Digital Minds. The first time I spoke with you was like 2 years ago.
Yes.
And then we talked about rather corporate intelligence, national intelligence, but now we have more individual vulnerability, right? Because we are in the pandemic, and you are specifically involved in this report mentioning about the individual risk that takes place because we are now more at home and we are now more connected to home-based devices, and a lot of percentage of the employees work at home. So what kind of risks are we facing, both individually and organization-wise? And one other thing, you mentioned in your recent Fortinet report of threat risks of cybersecurity due to WEAN, multi-cloud, data center, and remote worker, IoT, and so on. So this is a complex situation we are in. So where does this situation take us from here?
Yeah, so first of all, it's a pleasure to talk with you again. A lot has certainly happened in 2 years, you're right. I think, a lot of the focus on the vulnerability is that, this is typical in my career in cyberspace to see, but I think it's happening at a rapid pace now in terms of the complexity, in terms of the, what we call the attack surface growing, because, and the vulnerability goes with that. And it's a combination of, bandwidth, vehicles to move this that act like a catalyst, like 5G you mentioned, and that we mentioned in the report, but also the actual targets themselves that are connected to the end users and ultimately the victims. And this is typically, the IoT devices. Now we have the edge devices we can talk about. Going to your first question on the individuals, there's still as much and more at risk, because we always have to talk about risk. So if you talk about what are individuals vulnerable to, why are attackers doing this, it's when it comes down to an individual, typically attackers will want things like anything they can monetize, right? So again, phishing attacks, using theft of personal PII, personally identified information, so that they can use that, for monetization, fraud. These are all typical cases that we see going after attackers. E-commerce now and online shopping, that has been a very new normal during the pandemic. A lot of stores are closed, shopping centers are closed, big box stores, even small merchants have had to make a shift to online. And so there's been a tremendous increase in e-commerce traffic since, I like to say Cyber Monday, that's over here in North America that we have for online shopping deals, is every Monday. It's just been worldwide a large increase in online shopping traffic. So that's been a big vulnerability to individuals too, because what we see is attackers going after the individuals, trying to set up fake shopping sites, trying to actually lure those victims into sites that will actually attack them through vulnerabilities and set up malware on the systems. And a lot of people don't know that they, in a lot of regions as well, are also legally liable if they're hosting malicious infrastructure, because their devices, their laptop or their other devices on the network, gaming centers, can be used for attacks, DDoS attacks, to keep taking down other targets, hosting, stolen property as an example. So the risk is high, when we talk about individual vulnerability. The corporations, they, on the other side, those shopping sites themselves are under attack. This is something that we've seen a huge increase in focus for the way attackers are shifting. They're going after things like shopping cart vulnerabilities. As an example, plugins, they're attacking legitimate sites that have a lot of traffic to them and injecting, malicious scripts, PHP as an example. So this is very common, and this is how the two are combining, right? The individuals themselves are, the other single most shift that we saw this year was web-based threats overtaking email-based threats for the first time. That's significant. It wasn't like a 80%, 20% split. It was pretty close, but this has never happened before from everything we've seen at FortiGuard Labs. And the reason is because you have a lot of these devices that have gone outside of the corporate safeguards into work from home environments. And corporate email is centralized, and so doesn't shift too much with that transition, but web traffic does. If you think about these devices and they're going to all these other rogue sites, that's where these devices are getting hit, infected, and obviously that can spread to corporate devices quite easily.
So as you mentioned, phishing is like one of the main problems here, because we were talking about corporations getting phished through some fake emails, but now the individuals working at home are facing with this, big brand phishing emails like Netflix, or the Zoom calls are hacked, or in Turkey we had fake SMS messages like saying you have the priority for the COVID vaccine. So these are very sensitive points that individuals can easily be hacked or phished, right? So we need to be more digitalized and more connected, but we are also getting more and more vulnerable personally, and therefore organization-wise or corporation-wise. How do we get through this?
Yeah, you're right. And the vulnerable, psychologically, people are vulnerable this as well. That's been a big weapon for attackers. With COVID-19, what we saw this year was that attackers didn't need to innovate their payloads as well. Like there weren't a lot of new malware families created. They were just using new variants of the same ones because they can be effective with new delivery methods and those delivery attack methods. And those attack methods are social engineering. You mentioned the SMS phishes as an example. With vaccine distribution efforts, we've seen that globally now. Any one of these hot topics that comes up where people are familiar with it and more likely to click, this is where attackers are going to focus their time and effort. And so that's been a big thing this year, is the psychological aspect of it, and attackers capitalizing on that. So how do we deal with it? I mean, it is complex, like you said. It's, as always, there's never a silver bullet. It's a holistic effort that we need to follow. So a lot of the typical things we talk about that may not have been in the work from home environment before are very important. So of course, multi-factor authentication, segmentation is very important as well for networks. That's one of the big problems now, is you have this clash of corporate devices and personal devices on networks that are merging together or sitting physically from a topology on the same network. And as it is talked about from that individual vulnerability standpoint, and especially these IoT devices, it's very easy for these to become infected. The top 5 of our top, top 5 of our top 10 devices that we monitor worldwide. So this is our stats or data we look at are IoT targets, and very easy. And so if that's not segmented properly, it's just like COVID-19 with, in the biological world now, everybody is very cautious and aware of how quickly, how infectious this can be. It's the same thing with these devices. Even if they're sitting across the world, but they're on the same IP addressable space, the same network, they can become infected very easily. They're virtually close. And that's the problem. So we need to break down those walls, segment those, have secure Wi-Fi access. A lot of the typical things that we're seeing, there's a lot of easy things that can be done to make big progress. Changing default passwords. Router attacks are some of the most prominent attacks we're seeing still. With default passwords, they go after DNS settings on those routers, as an example. We always talk about patching. We'll continue to talk about patching. It's very important because attackers are still using attacks from 2018. They're being successful. Like the vast majority of attacks we're seeing in attackers' toolkits are software vault flaws and vulnerabilities from 2018. This year, 2020, they've discovered the most they ever have. There's about 20,000 new security holes that have been discovered. They're being weaponized, so they're being, exploits are being developed for these to use them more attacks. But we haven't seen them use them, and that's scary because that means that they have all that in their back pocket, in their toolkit when they want to use that. So patching continues to be a big thing that we talk about. And then, at the end of the day, this comes down to visibility. A lot of these threats are just not seen. So having good security inspection, threat intelligence, security inspection, having that through, if you're an individual, of course, there's things through ISP and carrier, through MSSP, managed service security providers, where you can get intelligence as to what's happening. Obviously, corporations need to go to a classic distributed enterprise model, right? Using things like EDR, endpoint detection and response, to be able to see if devices are in compliance, if they're up to date with patches. It's a big management, scenario when it comes to organizations.
In your report, you also mentioned about the 5G related swarm attacks, right?
Yes.
So in the report, you just say these attacks leverage hijacked devices, divided into subgroups, which is, I think, very important, each with specialized skills. They target networks or devices as an integrated system and share intelligence in real time to refine their attack as it is happening.
Yeah.
So this is another new problem.
Mm-hmm. Yes. It's
so
a good news.
We are just so much eager to get into 5G, but it also is actually itself might bring a new problem, right?
Yeah, definitely. With any technology, it can be harnessed as a tool, or it can be, a tool for good or a tool for evil. And and certainly 5G is a catalyst to this. I mean, if you think of the function of 5G, it is quick, it's fast, it's local or worldwide, right? I mean, we're talking about quick connections similar to Bluetooth that can be held in close proximity, but you're also talking about reach across the globe at very fast speeds. And so connectivity, that means there's going to be more IP addresses, more of these endpoints connected, meaning they're virtually close. Again, there's no such more, a lot of people talk about 6 degrees of separation as an example. I think that is going to become even closer because of 5G. And swarms, it's good news, bad news scenario. The good news is that this technology takes a while to develop. Again, attackers are still using trivial attacks because it's working for them. We did see some new developments this year of this technology, but it's nowhere near the level that it can be. That's coming. So the good news is we have time to prepare for that. But the bad news is when they do fully weaponize this and incorporate, weaponize artificial intelligence, machine learning into that, it becomes a very effective tool. And the whole concept of swarm is robustness, right? We've seen this in so many implementations before. It's there in nature with ants and bees as an example. It's there in drones. The whole idea is that if a couple of computers, in an example, were taken out of a swarm, others are automatically going to take their place so that the task at hand is not lost. And it's about being able to use different elements of that swarm. So part of it can be used for a DDoS attack to take down, security protections on the server. So the other part can go in and get files and leave, as an example.
In the report, you mentioned AI as a key in this area, right? So it looks like things changed and AI's role also changed in this game. And as you have been speaking, I was telling to myself, is AI a friend or sometimes an enemy in the cybersecurity?
Yeah. So it's mostly, it can be both. It definitely can. So where you implement AI, there's always a risk. And so when the risk fails, when it becomes,
because of the accuracy, the output, all the
the decisions that are made, the accuracy, the environment that it's put into. I mean, think about self-driving cars as an example, right? Initial AI implementations put them into a medium risk environment where it's a tool. It's more of a tool, right? I mean, the human still has 70% control over brakes and things like that, and it's more about visualization and alerts, not fully autonomous and self-driving. But now, of course, there's models that are in high risk AI where it is fully autonomous and driving, where the driver doesn't necessarily have to do anything at all. There's been cases, legal cases coming up now in the world because of that. So it gets complicated. And, of course, it's the same thing with cybersecurity as well, right? Because if you look at where you're going to put your AI environment for cybersecurity, there is no silver bullet. There's not this monolithic AI system that's going to overlook all of security, come up with all of the answers, block all of the attacks. That's just not realistic. So it comes down to where you first put AI into place, and where we began has become very effective from a good tool perspective is things like security-driven AI operations, as an example. A lot of integration between security products. We have this in our security fabric. It's very effective because devices can talk to each other instead of the human having to go in and do all of those steps. The AI is very capable of doing this. That's where we started in this first generation of AI. The second generation of AI has now gone into being able to make informed decisions by adding threat intelligence, right? An AI system can only make good decisions with good data. And that's where threat intelligence and my department, FortiGuard Labs, comes into so much key. So that's the good news, of course. But yeah, what we're seeing, again, when we talk about the weaponization of AI, is how cyber criminals and threat actors can use that technology against us. So, and there's a couple of scenarios there, and we just talked about the quantum scenario, but there's certainly things like defense evasion, so creating new versions of malware that are, let's talk in analogy in the COVID-19 world, right? With viruses, you need a vaccine, and now there's new variants, and the vaccine is still, right now, it looks like it's going to work against these new variants. But if you have a strong variant that's enough to split off from that family, then the vaccine is no longer going to work. It's the same thing with cybersecurity, right? And if you have an AI and machine learning model that can cleverly craft automatically these new versions that are going to completely be strong enough to break away from original antivirus detections or vaccines, that's where it can become it becomes an arm race, right? From AI system to AI system. It can be used in swarm. We talked about that. That is a very big weaponization of AI, being able to automatically have, instead of a hacker instructing, its malicious code what to do, like botnets, they're doing it on their own autonomously. It can also be used for, and we haven't seen a lot of this right now, but artificial intelligence fuzzing. I call this AIF. And for those who may not know what fuzzing is, it's hacking. And this is how hacking works. If you want to hack, you need to be able to crash code. That's how hacking works. So it's called fuzzing. You write programs that keep on sending different inputs into code until the code receives something it doesn't expect and it crashes. And when it crashes, that computer or the application is in a vulnerable spot. And when it's in a vulnerable spot, that's how hacking works, right? You can take over that, you can inject your own code. If from a human perspective, if we're looking at finding a zero-day flaw in a very secure, mature product, it can take months to discover one of those software flaws, because they've gone through all of this, secure development life cycle, a lot of cycles on that. If we talk about the IoT devices in general, a lot of these new products that haven't gone through that, very easy. You mentioned this, I think, on your first comment. You said easy catch. I agree, because it's, again, using that technique, it's easy to find these new hacking holes and then attack them. The concern is where artificial intelligence can be used to find those very hard to find ones, the ones that can take months or years to a human, could be done, within days with an artificial intelligence system. And so that is a very real scenario that we haven't seen yet. One of the ones I'm most concerned about with artificial intelligence, the weaponization of AI.
Don't scare us. Don't scare us, Eric.
The good news, okay, well, I'll throw one more comment on there. The good news is that the good guy, when we look at the industry and cybersecurity, we are, in terms of technology for AI and machine learning, I think we have the advantage. We have put simply more resources into it, there's been much more research, patents, a holistic effort in the industry, more people behind this. So I think we're ahead in terms of innovation. But with that said, attackers can innovate and move without restrictions. So it's the time to act is now.
All right. One other thing you mentioned in the report is space attacks.
Yes.
As you know, space issue is very much popular in terms of a lot of senses. But you say you take satellite systems as a risk for criminals to hack, and therefore, as the satellites crash down, the telecommunication systems will also crash down. So you are introducing us another new problem. Tell me about it.
Okay. So it sounds very sci-fi and futuristic when you say attacks from space. But so just to be clear, the scenario we're talking about is not, is first of all, leveraging satellite communication. If we look at the way, so it's about connectivity. We talked about virtually being close. We talked about 5G. Beyond 5G, so 5G is earthbound, right? Primarily, I mean, a lot of the connections are done through Earth. But of course now, traditionally, commercial satellite internet has been very expensive. It's been very limited, just used to airplanes, cruise ships as an example. But now with there's a lot of innovations that are making this a reality in the next couple of years. So it's going to be much more accessible to corporations, to OT environments, right? If you think of a lot about OT environments for critical infrastructure, mining, forestry, all these different environments, they have remote locations and they need connectivity. So a lot of the times, again, some of these have been off grid or they've been segmented, but now with commercialization of more bandwidth through satellites, all of that is going to be bringing those remote sites on the grid. That's just the reality for management, and there's no such thing as an air gap network really anymore. And so with these satellites, I'm not talking about the satellites being compromised themselves, because a satellite is really just a relay station, right? It's a way to take a signal from Earth, transmit that signal to another location. It's called a base station. And that is where I see these attacks happening, on the base stations themselves. They're basically like an ISP or an internet carrier, but for satellites. And if you think of, if attackers can compromise those base stations and get access to the traffic, again, it's just another target. It becomes another target. So there's two problems, right? You have the connectivity issue where you have now it's not just the IoT devices in home, it's also these remote locations that just haven't had internet connections before. There's really going to be no spot on Earth in the future where there is no such thing as that, on your mobile phone having a no signal or no connection. That's where we're moving towards, and that just means that attack surface is going to be complete for attackers.
It's like in Hollywood movies, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So again, it's with that, it's the same sort of attacks we're seeing. It's similar to 5G, right? It's just that the edge, as we call it now, like our edge devices have been bound to Earth, but now this is literally going to be expanding into space as well.
Mm-hmm. So I know that you have been expecting some improvements in law enforcement. And as you mentioned in the report, there has been some progress. What is changing now? Because you personally and your corporation, Fortinet, fights for it. But at the end of the day, there should be a law enforcement to take people into court, or however justice is ever going to work.
Yeah.
So what is happening in this field of cybersecurity right now?
Yeah, so this is something very close to my heart. I believe in this. I'm a big advocate of this. I really think we need stronger public-private sector relationships. I've been building these for over 10 years with Fortinet, FortiGuard Labs. And this is between national computer emergency response, also law enforcement, also private sector members too. And really we need all of this to come together, right? And it comes down to threat intelligence. So if we as a private sector, we know about an attack, we're very good at protection, right? We can protect customers, we can build up defense, we can make it harder for attackers to get into networks. That's our goal, right? To make it more expensive for cyber criminals to operate. Law enforcement's goal is to arrest them, to prosecute them, but they can't do that without the proper intelligence from the private sector. Often they need that because we're the cybersecurity experts. And there's been a big gap there in the past, but we've made a lot of strides in the industry to which I'm very excited about, to close this. We've made good progress since we last talked. Interpol has now formed Project Gateway, and we're a Gateway member. So this is a new collaborative agreement, not just with Fortinet, but other members. It's an actual structure that's been set up. We work on campaigns together. And again, we're trying to, from our side, we're creating playbooks. That's another big development on our end, is playbooks, so that we can actually track cybercrime and we can solve that challenge of who are these people, because that is very hard to do. Requires a lot of threat intelligence, but that's why we're working on this together. And so there's also training efforts that have been done. Another new effort that we've been involved in is the World Economic Forum. So this is the C4C, Center for Cybersecurity, and the Partnership on Cybercrime. I co-authored a report on that, which we just released about a month ago now. And this is recommendations as to how we can have all those pieces together, not just law enforcement, but prosecutors, court, policymakers, private sector as well, all working together. And so, yeah, there's a lot of work to be done, but a lot of great movement since we last talked.
It's nice to hear you being hopeful about it. Because it's one of the main goals of fight against cyber crimes. So, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say, there's I remain hopeful because there's a lot of great people in our industry, and there's also a true collaborative spirit, which is needed, especially at this time.
Very good to hear that from you. And finally, Derek, as you know, Turkish business and the entrepreneurship ecosystem here is very much growing. And they really need your suggestions because you personally and your corporation is very much experienced in national and intelligence, corporate intelligence.
Mhm.
So what do you have to say?
So from a businesses and entrepreneurship level, as I said, even SMBs, small and medium businesses, are frequent targets that we see, and nobody's immune to this. And a lot of that low-hanging fruit is what attackers go after with these new networks that are being set up, unpatched devices. So a lot of the things that we talked about, I call it cyber hygiene, is very important. So just quickly on that again, multi-factor authentication.
Cyber hygiene?
Cyber hygiene, yes.
Oh,
yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Washing your cyber hands.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, things like just having this mentality. Things like multi-factor authentication, very important. That segmentation we talked about, secure Wi-Fi access, changing default passwords, having that patch management, having obviously endpoint protection is really important. Again, if you don't have a big network infrastructure, there's also MSSP that you can rely on for security services. But training is very important. There's a lot of free training out there. There's a lot of great material. From a enterprise level, we have obviously enterprise solutions. That whole centralized management that I talked about is very important, especially today in the work from home environment, right? So this is everything end to end, cloud security all the way down to if you have 1,000 employees all working in their homes, how do you make sure they're up to compliance? How do you ensure that you have security inspection on those devices and the traffic that goes in between? Also at that level, we have training. We have NSC training as an example. This is our, we have 8 different certification levels from everything from entry level all the way up to level 8, which is our very advanced level. We also have new consulting services that we've launched as well. So that's important for things like thinking like a hacker, going through the mind of a hacker, because that helps you understand security better. And a majority of the threats that those, SMB, enterprise corporations are going to be facing are cybercrime. So again, having this zero trust mentality is really important when people are reaching out to you on these lures, vaccine, distribution we talked about, the online shopping, e-commerce targets. A lot of these are just good to be front of mind. From a national security level, the game is often different. It's often about not cyber crime, but things like cyber warfare and cyber terrorism and APT, so targeted attacks, right? And these are really, at that level, I would suggest really working on integration of playbooks. This is something we're starting to do more. I talked about the playbooks. These are full guides on who the attackers are, how do they operate, what regions are they targeting, what verticals, what tools are they using, and how do you identify those gaps and protect against those tools. That can also be done from a cybercrime level, but it's very important from also a national security level. And I think, yeah, that's keeping that front of mind. From a national level, supplying tools, right? Tools and channels for people to reach out, incident response, like what happens if businesses are getting hit with ransomware, who do they call? That's also really quite important, I would say. So a lot of this comes down to the national and computer emergency response efforts.
So thank you, Derek, for your time joining us in this episode in the Digital Minds and bringing up the new threats for the next year, because your area of expertise is very complex and it looks like it's getting more and more. And I know you have been very much working on it. And I really much would like to hear from your progress from you and Fortinet.
Absolutely.
And in the upcoming days.
Yeah, and we are on this 24/7, 365. So it's like I said, there's still a lot of hope, and it's great to see a lot of progress also from the good side. So we'll continue to update on that.
Hopefully. Thank you again for joining us in this episode.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.